All
Okay,
right.
everyone. We want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a sincere one. As today is the weekly Sabbath, and we're coming up to the spring appointed times, aren't we, Curtis? They're fast approaching upon us. I've got my dear brother, Curtis Reed, joining me for the tag team on the teaching and the 2 subsequent teachings. How are you, brother?
Yeah, good. Very, very, very busy time for us. Launching River Branch and just all the things involved right now with the wider community and coming up to the appointed times, which are his appointed times. And so we're getting these appointed times teaching series together, and hopefully it'll be a real blessing for the community as we come into the start of the biblical year. And as we enter into honor his appointed times, not ours. And so we'll be seeking to not just look at the what, but also hopefully in a living sense, the why.
Yeah. So if you are watching on YouTube or Rumble after the fact and you're not here live with us, but you would like to come join us live for the teachings and for all the things that happen before the teaching, you know, the announcements, and you just want to get involved and get involved into a community where the Ruach is moving. We meet every Shabbat on the Gregorian Saturday, 9 a.m. PST. And if you're wondering how to join us live, if you just go to riverbranchfellowship.com, scroll down on the homepage, and there will be a link where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. And what will happen, this little box will pop up, and you can put your first and last name and email there, hit subscribe, and that will put you on our mailing list. And every Friday, we send out the weekly newsletter with relevant notices and news going on in the community, but also with the Zoom details that you will need to join the live gathering. And so come and join us. We would love to come and say hi, and for you to be a part of what the Father is doing in our midst. Right. The Passover or Pesach. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably thinking, hang on, but the Pesach and unleavened bread's not starting for a couple of weeks. You are correct in thinking that. But as a community, what we like to do is being put onto our hearts, and we've done this now for a couple of years. We like to get the teachings for the appointed times released ahead of the appointed times, because we like to give the message so that we can prepare ourselves, and so that when we do come to the appointed times, we've already had the messages, we've already had, you know, the challenges and the journey leading up to it, so that then at the appointed times themselves, we can give them back to our King. And so this is why from today and the next couple of weeks after, we will be giving the messages for both the Pesach, for unleavened bread, and the counting of the Omer, the Feast of Weeks, and also the Shavuot teaching, because the spring feasts are all one. We like to chop and divide them, but we don't get the luxury to do that biblically. So over the next course of the 3 weeks, we're going to be giving the messages for the spring appointed times, so that when they do arrive, we can be ready for them. We're going to be doing the spring appointed times teachings from a very interesting backdrop, actually. Curtis and I have been busy scheming and beavering away behind the scenes in putting the messages together, and the Father has led us on a really interesting journey that we're really excited actually to share it with the community. And so let there be light. What has light got to do with the spring appointed times? It's definitely an interesting lens to view the spring appointed times through, eh, Curtis?
Yeah. Well, it's one that if we look at his first coming and what this was all about, and his purchase as the part of the great plan of redemption of his people with his blood, Elohim taking full responsibility, accountability, and consequence for having us all born in and brought in through the womb into the time domain. And as a part of that, there is a way that Elohim expresses himself. And of course, that is seen in Bereshit as we commence these appointed time teachings together in Genesis, where he kind of opens up with an interesting passage. And we believe that there's something for us, a thread, a scarlet thread, if you will, that pulls right through the word from the Torah right through to the revelation of Messiah. And something is of a thread for us to understand and to look at as a part of his appointed times. And so we're going to be kicking that off with the spring appointed times and this interesting thread that we see, that we believe is there, and it relates to the light of Elohim.
Yeah. So let's begin this journey. Let's get our boots strapped up and seatbelts fastened. His appointed times. This is a well-known passage that is always quoted at the appointed times or the lead up to them. And that is Leviticus 23, verses 2. It says, "Speak unto the children of Israel." This is why it's important to know who you are within the body of Messiah, because when you understand who you are, these appointed times should all of a sudden start mattering to us. "And say unto them, concerning the appointed times of Yah, which you shall proclaim to be holy dress rehearsals, these are my appointed time, says Yah." They're his, they're not ours. And unfortunately, even in the more messianic Hebrew roots movement, those that do tend to look a little bit deeper at their faith, unfortunately, we've made these ours. We've turned these into conferences, into, let's show off our latest knowledge that we've acquired and so forth. And we miss the reason for the appointed times and who they ultimately point to. Elohim is the author of our faith, and as part of that, he's given us these appointed times that we are to proclaim in their appointed times, in due season, but we're not to do this at the expense of the why, and specifically who they point to, which would be our Messiah, our King, Yeshua. As part of the commands, we see that in Deuteronomy 16:16, 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before Yah your Elohim at the place that he will choose. The he will choose there's a whole interesting thing, but essentially, just because there's no physical temple doesn't mean that we're not to honor these anymore, because we know that, as we're going to see through these teachings, that we, the body of Messiah, are the true temple, the true dwelling place of his Ruach, and he has chosen that that's where he will place his name. And so if we're his temple, that means wherever we are scattered to the 4 corners, we can appear before Yah our Elohim. We don't get out of this one, people. At the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we're soon coming into, at the Feast of Shavuot or Pentecost, and at the Feast of Tabernacles, they shall not appear before Yah empty-handed.
Honoring his gatherings is, and why we are looking at the Torah in this. Again, if you have an identity crisis and you don't know that you're being called into the house of Israel, of course, all of this is apparently not in play and been done away with. And yet, even though on both the Christian and the Jewish side of the river, as we often speak. One is on the Christian side has again reinvented Messiah in their own image, and of course on the other side is yet to accept that the Messiah has come. But what we're finding here in the Torah is these instructions are relating to his people, Israel, and as a part of that, we are to proclaim them in their appointed times. And of course, so we want to be able to, well, how are we to do that now? And what does that look like? And what's this about? And as we are on the lead up to this, and why we're doing the appointed times teachings on the lead up to this, is that we really want to honor that. What does proclaiming them actually look like? In this crazy world of ours, and this scattered house of Israel on the four corners of the earth, and all of the things that we face, what does this really look like if we are to identify ourselves with his great house? And of course, all of the appointed times are speaking directly of the revelation of Messiah and biblical prophecy and how it relates to his great plan of redemption, for which many of you and many of us, we were raised in a faith of some sort. We were not taught this. And so Michael and I go to great lengths to labor this in the teachings, but at this particular time, we can't state these elements of the Torah enough, eh, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting as well is that there seems to be, Yah is putting an onus on the males specifically. This is to do with spiritual headship. Those that are the spiritual heads of their home, Yah is saying to them, guys, you need to be there. You need to be there, take accountability and responsibility for your families and how you head your family through this faith. As we go through the teaching series this year, we're going to see this journey of obviously getting rid of the leaven and, unleavened bread, getting rid of the leaven of our lives. And we've spoken many times over the years into what that looks like practically, that this is not just about getting the crumbs out of your toaster. That shadow picture is there to teach us a much deeper lesson. But we're going to see over the course of the series that if we don't get rid of this leaven, are we actually hindering our ability to be a vessel fit for purpose within his house? Because you either get to be a vessel of honor, and thus the Ruach can actually use you. But we're going to put forward through this series, if we don't get rid of the leaven in our lives, that actually leaves us open to being a vessel of dishonor. And we may not even be aware that we're being a vessel of dishonor. But if we can start getting to grips with what it means to be a vessel of honor, then hopefully the Ruach can shine the light of Elohim through us. And what would be the purpose of that? There's a wedding feast that is yet to be fulfilled. And a famous parable tells us that there's going to be many people invited, and that the invite will be going out through his body, through his people. And so are we vessels fit for purpose? And we're going to put forward the thought that if we're not getting rid of the leaven of our lives, can we even be used? We may be in the faith, but are we of good use to the master? This is very important. So if you didn't know, the spring and the fall appointed times are actually, they fit around the harvest times of especially, the Middle East and where the land of Israel is right now, and has been over the last, almost 3,000-4,000 years. But as you can see, the spring feasts, and this is where we're at, it's usually around the time of the Gregorian time, April time, if you want to call it that, where for most of the earth, or at least half of it, spring comes into being. And so this is actually focused around the barley and the wheat harvest. And what many people miss, they'll look at unleavened bread and they'll look at Shavuot, unleavened bread being the barley harvest and Shavuot being the wheat harvest, and they'll separate those. But when you actually read Leviticus, you clearly see that the unleavened bread and Shavuot are actually all under the spring feasts. And Messiah, when he came almost 2,000 years ago, these were literally fulfilled within 1 year. And this means we do not get to divide Shavuot and unleavened bread, and the period of time in between these, which has come to be known as the counting of the Omer, but biblically, a better term for it would actually be the Feast of Weeks, weeks in plural, 7 of them specifically. But here we are, approaching the spring feasts and the barley and the wheat harvest that would have been associated with them. You can see here that this is the fall appointed times, which were actually centered around the fruit harvest and a few nuts, Curtis and I like to say. The nuts are included in that. But you can see that the spring appointed times are very much around the barley and the wheat, but the fall appointed times are around the fruit. And, you know, that shadow picture pointing to a great harvest in the spring and what good fruit, or hope, you know, maybe even bad fruit, is that harvest going to bring? Because we're yet awaiting the fulfillment of the fall appointed times. And so what is the fruit that his body is bearing as we approach the end of this age? Curtis, I'll let you speak to this one.
Okay, let's just call up this is just showing his spring appointed times, and what we're going to be looking at over the period, of course, at this time of the year. This was literally fulfilled by Messiah almost 2,000 years ago. Let no one say to you otherwise. It is a part of his great plan of redemption, and we are now to honor and remember this. And he gave us instructions to remember the commencement of it, and to continue to honor now these coming to life. And so since they've been honored, we're seeing a living sense of this is now come into play. This is traditionally not taught, and it should have been. The Ruach is now a part of our faith, our journey. And we are not to be that which appears to be godly and to deny the power of the Ruach. This has happened, unfortunately, everywhere in the faith journey. But if we're to understand that Elohim has not abandoned this process, and since it was literally fulfilled, it was set in motion. Hebraic thinking is building upon itself. It's not Western thinking, which has been there, done that. So when we're honoring something from a Hebraic sense, we're knowing that we are progressing now to the fulfillment of the fall appointed times, which means everything has been live and has been in play. And so when you look at the fall and we come into the grape harvest and the crushing, if you will, and the appearing of nuts in the body, we get all sorts of incredible, end times prophecy and all of this stuff that's going on and what you've learned and pre-trib, post-trib, mad-trib, trib, everything, raptures and all of the confusing stuff that has been pumped into all of our heads, depending on how long we've been in the faith. And this has come about. And so a lot of us have been turned onto myths as a result of the leaven that's been in the house and has taken hold through Mystery Babylon, this spiritual representation of a spiritual adulteress that has come into the house and is contaminating us. And so we bring this all to his appointed times. One of the things that we should really, really understand, and again, Michael and I reiterate this all the time, if somebody is trying to speak biblical prophecy to you and is not in the framework of the appointed times, you just leave. This is the way Yah has laid it down in his Torah for us to understand, whether people could see it or not. And it was literally fulfilled, the spring appointed times, whether people could see it or not. And the fall appointed times will be literally fulfilled, whether people know it or not. Elohim is not marching to our religious interpretations. He is not marching to our so-called knowledge. He is not marching to our religious journeys. He has wanted us to know something clearly laid out in the Torah, and labored it greatly, and it would all point to Messiah. And we were to understand prophecy around this in the sense of his great plan of redemption. And of course, we've gone off stray and off track on both sides of the river as a result. So this is why we are really, at this time of the year, we labor this, don't we, Michael? Over and over and over again. Only because this is the great plan of redemption, captured in his appointed times, because the plan of redemption is not based around all our religious denominations and movements and journeys and whatnot. The plan of redemption is based around, when you know it, Messiah.
I know, go figure, right? And unfortunately, because people have, by and large, both sides of the river, because they've not especially honored this one of getting rid of the leaven in their houses and in their faith journeys, if you're not honoring this, you're definitely not going to understand the fall appointed times. There's a reason why he kicks off his plan of redemption with, people, I want you to get rid of this religious leaven that you guys have picked up along the way, because it's preventing you from understanding the faith that Yah has authored. And so, unfortunately, like you said, Curtis, denomination this, pre-trib this, post-trib that, all of this is the fruit of not having honored unleavened bread. And so this is why Yah has saw it fit that we revisit this year in, year out. It's for our good.
And that's so we're standing on the foundation, the rock. And that's why it all points to the rock. Messiah is the rock. And so we're standing on that. And if we're not standing on how he's laid it out in his Torah, then our house is built on sand. And of course, we've got the fulfillment of the fall appointed times coming. We're nearing the end of the age, and there's a lot of people that have had their faith built upon the sand. Little bits of truth, but they are not the rock in itself. And we need to understand that his appointed times is all about the rock, the cornerstone, Messiah. And so we want to build upon that, especially coming to the end of the age.
In the beginning. So this is what we're really going to kick off the teaching series with, and this is going to be essentially the backdrop for the whole teaching. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. The spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters, and Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And so this is the very first thing Yah does in the creation of the heavens and the earth. Let there be light. He brings forth his light. And so we're going to use this as the backdrop actually for the Spring Appointed Times teaching, because as it turns out, this is a major central theme to the plan of redemption, the light of Elohim. So much so that Elohim saw the light and that it was good. And Elohim separated the light from the darkness. So right from the beginning, Elohim brings forth light, and then he steps into this place of separating light from dark. Did he just do this haphazardly, Curtis?
I do not think so. And when we open up the Torah, let there be light, we think is a thread that carries right through everything our Elohim is doing in both a literal, in both the figurative sense, but the literal sense. He is light. And there's something that he's doing that's come upon a dark and brooding environment, and how this all plays into his plan of redemption.
Now, we've put a note here, fulfillment of the fall appointed times. And so just an interesting thing to think of. Are we actually getting a foreshadowing of an element of the plan of redemption captured in the fall appointed times? Because the fulfillment of these is there's a bridal selection. There's going to be a sheep and goats judgment. There's going to be a wedding feast. Some people are in, some people are out. And so even over the fulfillment of the fall appointed times, we see this act of judgment, of separation, one from the other. And right there, this is captured, we believe, right in the beginning of creation itself. And that this is centered on separating light from darkness. If he is light, he's separating that which is not of him from himself. And so as his people, are we bearing his light? Or as Yeshua would say, I'm going to paraphrase this, that if you claim to be light, but actually you're darkness, how dark is that darkness? You know, there's this thing going on in the faith. What is of him? What is not of him?
The tohu vohu there that's mentioned there, and as it goes into how this relates, remember what Scripture is saying, that the darkness scatters from the light. And so as he's bringing his light forth to complete his great plan of redemption, and as this light is coming forth to this grand lead up to the fulfillment of the fall appointed times, there is a scattering of darkness. The light is actually in the offensive position from Elohim's position, and it is the darkness that scatters. And so this is why when we're dealing with matters that we, if we're to look at it from his perspective, he is bringing this in through his great plan of redemption. And so this is the way that we're looking at the appointed times this year.
As part of the backdrop for the teaching, and this scripture we're going to read is going to form part of the challenge that we're going to give to the community as we go through parts 2 and then also parts 3. In the Exodus account is about the delivering of the house of Israel from bondage. And there's a little note here that we believe the Exodus account is a typology of what will occur at the end of this age. Like, we're currently in bondage, and we know that the fall appointed times are about the setting free of his people from the bondage of the unbelieving Rome and the darkness that has descended upon this earth. And so we have this really interesting thing going on in the judgments upon Egypt. When Moshe stretched out his hand toward the heaven, there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. Think, the last 2 days that have been going on as we enter the end of this age. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel, the people, not the land, the people, they had light where they lived. And this means that throughout the whole land of Egypt, you'd have seen a beacon of light coming from the area of Goshen. What is this a typology of? As we draw closer to the end of this age, as his people are about to be set free with what we believe is the soon coming fulfillment of the fall appointed times, we see yet again that light, the light of Elohim, is playing a crucial role in this.
And it's his people that his light, the people of Israel had the light where they lived. So there's this connection that's being brought in with the people and the light of Elohim. And as the darkness is ascending, is it possible that the very thing coming up to the fulfillment of the fall appointed times is there's going to be a light that is repelling the darkness? The darkness is scattering because there is a light occurring, and where is that light coming from? And so this is going to be the challenge that's going on. This is a very interesting shadow picture being given here in the Exodus account, but it has a very, very real purpose to play with the light of Elohim in all of this. So take this in a sense of where really is the light going to be seen as we come to the end of the age? And how important is it for us to get this now?
But before we even get to anything fall appointed times, here we are at the spring feast. And as we said earlier, you're not going to understand the fall appointed times if you haven't been honoring unleavened bread. And you're not going to understand how light factors into the plan of redemption. So, because unfortunately, there's been a leavening of his people going on. And so for us to really understand what the role of the house of Israel will play and be as we approach the end of this age, we first need to honor unleavened bread and get rid of the leaven of our lives. Why? There's been a lot of myths going on and being taught in vast proportions of his body, both on the Christian riverside, on the Judah riverside, and now especially in this in-between space, you know, whether you want to call it Messianic, Hebrew roots, the leavening has occurred there as well. And so let us now begin to try and really wrestle with what it means to honor unleavened bread. I'll let you read this, Curtis.
2 Timothy 4:3-4. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passion. So what they're going to do is, well, we're going to try and find people who will make us, essentially, it's a feeling emotionally based seeking. Tell me what I want to hear. And so we'll seek those teachers, or they will go and drink at those wells and search around, because these people are telling us what we want to hear. And of course, there's a very danger to this because it says and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths as a result. And so often I say to people, if you're getting this pricking of the ruach or whatnot that's happening in your spirit with something that's being taught to you, instead of just shooting the messenger or trying to blame, Michael or Curtis or something that we're teaching, maybe the Ruach is trying to do something, because maybe there's actually something inside us, there's a leaven that we're supposed to look at, that maybe there's a challenge going on. And if you push that away and go and find somebody to tell you what you already know or think you know, you can be in danger of being turned into the myths. And the myths are often presented to us through tradition.
Now, there's a lot of mythos surrounding what we're about to go through. A lot of us have probably picked this up as well from our past religious journeys. So as we go forth into this teaching, there's something that we really need to understand regarding what the temple of Elohim truly is, because the apostles and the early disciples had a somewhat very different understanding than what is actually being taught out there. Vast proportions of the New Testament, or what is so-called the New Testament, actually don't make sense if you have this wonky understanding as to what the true temple of Elohim is and where the light of Elohim truly resides. So, for the sake of time, we don't have time to show you all the verses and so forth, but when you see the word temple in your English translations in the Brit Hadashah, or what you would know as the New Testament, there's two words being used in the Greek. In the English, you'll see temple, 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 temple. But in the Greek, you get these two words, neos and hieron, okay? Because of the English going temple, 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 this has misled many, many people in regards to this scripture or the scriptures, as the gospel accounts uses the word neos in some very key places. So because you're just reading temple, temple, temple in English, you're led to believe that it's speaking of one and the same thing. But even the Greek is capturing two different usages. And if you don't understand the difference between these, you're very easily led onto myths and fables and this religious leaven coming into our understanding, ultimately, of the plan of redemption and the appointed times. And so what we're going to see is we read some scriptures. Understanding this difference between Naos and Hieron is going to really change things up a bit. Because the disciples, when penning the New Testament, they made some choice word usages, and it really makes a difference as to how you read and interpret key passages in the gospel accounts. So, just to define terms a little bit, the word hieron in the Greek specifically means the entire or whole temple ground. So not just the temple building, where it can be the court as well, the outer courts. It refers to essentially the bricks, mortar, and place of the temple. Now, the word hieron can mean sanctified or unsanctified. And this is a key distinction to understand, because the word naos in Greek can only mean the sanctuary or the Holy of Holies. So hieron can be used of something that is sanctified and unsanctified, even to the point that one of the usages of hieron in the book of Acts actually refers to a pagan temple of the goddess Artemis. Now, you couldn't use naos for that word because it's not a sanctified temple. And so this is the key difference between these two words. Hieron essentially is the bricks, the mortar, and the precinct of what would be called a temple. Naos in the Greek can only mean something that which is sanctified by Yah, as you see its usage in the Brit Hadashah. So when you understand that key difference, this is going to be critical in understanding as we move forward through the teaching. Just to give an example of how hieron is used, remember that this Greek word hieron is the bricks and the mortar, so to speak, the grounds of a building commonly known as a temple. Yeshua entered the temple, the hieron, and drove out all who sold and bought in the hieron. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. Now, the money changers were not in the sanctuary or the Holy of Holies, right? They were not in the actual building, as it were, of the temple. They would have been in the outer courts. And so this Greek usage of the word is showing you that hieron is really the bricks, the mortar, and the precincts of which the temple was built upon. Okay? We can easily understand as well that because Yeshua is overturning these tables, this is not where the presence of Yah was. Yeshua would not have done this in a sanctified place. He would have known the Torah commands on this. So we can see from hieron here that this is just referring to a precinct, an area, bricks and mortar. This is not sanctified by Yah, i.e., his divine presence is not physically there. We can clearly see this from that.
Yeah, the light of Elohim is not there. And there's no way to make Messiah with demonstrating this kind of position that would be dishonoring in a truly sanctified place. And so we know he was the sinless sacrifice and lamb. And so he's not missed the mark here. It's not a contradiction. What it's clearly telling you, evidentially is recorded in the Brit Hadashah, is that the shining, the countenance of Elohim that would be associated with the true Holy of Holies is not there. And you see this in Matthew 21:12. It says, and Yeshua entered the temple and drove out all who sold, bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables and the money changers of the seats of salt. So what does it go on to now, though? What's the distinction here? So this is the head of.
So, Curtis, what actually makes a temple set apart then? Please educate me.
Well, in the first temple and tabernacle, Moshe and Aaron, Yah commanded this, and his presence was clearly there and recorded. So we're seeing where this is first captured in the Hebrew of a set apart, a holy sanctuary, that the command is by Yah to do it, and his presence is clearly recorded. So the first, or temple, or if you will, the tabernacle. What was second? Well, we got Solomon's temple. And so we know David had blood on his hands, but Solomon went on at this time to fulfill this, Yah's command, and his presence is clearly recorded. So these are fulfilling an aspect where what the Greek was capturing, and what we were speaking about, how it was recorded in the New Testament or the Brit Hadashah, there is an essence here that is in this temple, there will be a set apart, a true, as the Greek would put it, naos, or set apart place, was actually there because the presence of Yah himself, Elohim, is there. And then it goes on. The third temple. Now, there's something interesting. Now, most people would never call it the third temple, Michael. And there's this whole the thing around Jeremiah's grotto, and we're going to talk about this. But this is interesting because Jeremiah, is interesting. He's accredited to in the book of Second Maccabees as this outside account, non-canonical, but nonetheless very accurate accounts of something that was done at the time of Jeremiah, where the Babylonian offense against Jerusalem and coming in, that they took the ark and hid it. And what's interesting is that we know that his presence was a part of that at the time of Jeremiah, and there's no record of it leaving. So something Jeremiah has done at this time, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, would have been done with the clan of the Kohathites, with the Levitical priesthood. They would have been the ones, and the only ones by Torah that could have moved this thing, as per what was done with Jeremiah at the time when the Babylonian push was coming towards the city. Then there's this fourth temple that's recorded, Darius the Great. Yah's command, built by man's decree. Now, this is interesting because now we're starting to see where the strength of man is coming in, and there's no record of a certain presence that's involved with this. And we go on to a fifth temple, which everybody's familiar with, and that's Herod's reconstruction, built now by man's decree alone. And then there's this sixth temple here, this possible modern day efforts, and you hear all of these things around the Temple Mount Institute and this in the modern state of Israel, and them wanting to rebuild a temple. Again, there is nothing in Scripture or command this would be built if it occurred by man's decree. And if something is built by man's decree alone and by his hand, that does not mean the presence of Elohim. So we have to be very, very careful about certain language that's being used. We can't change the pattern given to us. If Yah doesn't command it, he doesn't give his presence to it. And so this is very interesting. And of course, this is why you saw Yeshua's behavior at the time, at the time of Herod's reconstruction temple. So nothing's going to change. Elohim's not going to come down and sanctify any efforts of anything going on in the modern state of Israel right now concerning the rebuilding of a temple, no matter what the justifications or excuses are. We're not necessarily trying to decide what man or man shouldn't do. We're just purely pointing out that his presence is what creates a naos. So build whatever we want, but we're just making the point scripturally. There's just a 1,000-year reign of Messiah, this final age, as a part of his great plan of redemption with his bridal governance. This is commanded and gives the presence by Yah. And we clearly see this recorded in the last chapters of Ezekiel and the great prophet Ezekiel. And so obviously we're going to have his literal physical presence there. There is no debate here. And there will be the Naos present in that literal shadow picture, as well as within his bridal governance as an absolute. So by Yah's command and his presence. And then, of course, we think from an eternity perspective, and where this is all pointing to is the heart of his people heading into eternity. It was always the desire of his presence and covenant. And so he's fulfilling this great plan before we head outside the time domain once again. And so he's done this incredible thing, Michael, as we move forward. And it is actually given to us and laid out through the Torah, the historical accounts, and of course, coming prophecy. And so what we want to do is not to change any of this, just simply accept this is what it is, this is what it said, and we can't change and manipulate and change these things to make Yah and his plan of redemption and his commands, and most certainly his presence, fit our religious bias presuppositions or whatever dogma or myths we may have been turned unto regarding prophetic teachings or traditions of man, regardless of either side of the river.
Yeah. And I think the main simple point that we're trying to really go on about in all of this is, what is it that makes a naos versus a hirion? It's Yah's physical presence, thus his light shining forth from that naos. And so while this fourth temple, the Darius the Great temple, while Yah did command it, he didn't put his presence in it. And this is something that is so often missed. And as a result, people just seem to forget that actually what makes something set apart is Elohim himself. And so let's not get confused. Just because Yah commanded something, he didn't actually put his presence there. Where do we see his presence following the destruction of Solomon's temple? This is all. So we're not saying, oh, it shouldn't be there or it should be there. We're talking about Yah's presence and thus his light.
Yeah, and that's all. What are the true set apart resting places as we can understand scripturally as it relates to the naos, his presence being somewhere? And we certainly can make an argument without fail in the Torah with Moses and Aaron in the tabernacle, certainly with King Solomon. We can make an argument for Jeremiah's grotto because we don't see the absence of it going in. We certainly, from a prophetic sense, the 1,000-year reign or the last and great final age of the plan of redemption, the reign of Messiah, that is evidently obvious. And of course, from an eternal perspective, it residing amongst his people with him outside the time domain, the eternal temple. So we can speak to these in relationship to a set apart place and the presence of Elohim. These other ones, we need to start understanding there's some things here that we can't just suddenly make this a true set apart place, because it requires the light, the shining forth, the presence of Elohim to meet that basic qualification.
So, all that being said, this was foundation really for this question. What actually really happened on the ancient Tav? Because there's a prevalent myth, or several prevalent myths, going on around the crucifixion of Messiah and what actually went down at his death. And again, sometimes the truth is so simple, but we can't see the wood from the trees. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it makes so much more biblical sense, especially within the context of the plan of redemption. We just want to lay a little Torah foundation, because everything that occurs regarding the plan of redemption, you should be able to make it fit within the context of Torah. In Leviticus 6, verses 27 and 28, this is regarding the sin offerings and how the priests were to deal with the sin offering, and specifically with objects that would be stained or touched by the blood of the sin offering. It says, whatever touches its flesh, i.e., of the sin offering, shall be set apart. And when any of its blood is splashed on a garment, you shall wash that on which it was splashed in a set apart place. So essentially, the Torah is saying, if the blood of the sin offering was to splash on any garment of clothing, you had to wash it in a set apart place. Now, the word for place in the Hebrew is makom, which means it's a generic place, an area, a standing spot. What's interesting, it can also mean of the condition of the body or mind, which is really interesting when you start to think of what the blood of the true sin offering, i.e. the blood of Messiah, and that being sprinkled upon the conscience. There's some really interesting allusions there. But what's even more interesting is that the root word of makom is the Hebrew word kum, which means to rise, to arise, to stand, to rise up. Think, is this an allusion to resurrection? If the blood of the true sin offering is sprinkled on some garments, will it be able to rise in a day that is yet coming? Interesting allusions there. But it goes on. And the earthenware vessel in which it is boiled, so a sin offering could be placed on the altar, but it could also be boiled in a pot. And these pots would have been made of clay. Think of the illusion that we are clay vessels. And anyway, that vessel, it shall be broken. If it is boiled in a bronze vessel, that shall be scoured and rinsed in water. So if the sin offering was put in an earthenware vessel, that pot had to be broken. So think earth, okay? Think of what the blood of Messiah was sprinkled upon. But if the vessel was that of bronze, again, you had to scrub it and rinse it in water. So think of, being cleansed, being washed by the living waters of the word. Now, shall be broken in the Hebrew, it's shavar, which means literally to rend violently, to break. I mean, it means to smash into pieces like an earthenware vessel. Think the potter and the clay and all these things, but it has to be completely smashed. Why? Because set apart blood came upon it. So this is your Torah backdrop, your shadow picture for something that is going to occur and did what we believe did occur literally in the spring appointed times. All of this is what actually happened at the ancient Tav, and how literal was it really?
And Yeshua cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Okay, so there's something interesting going on here. And you'll notice that what we did in the imagery for the teaching, there's a witness by the Roman guards occurring. Now, we don't believe there's a coincidence behind that. There appears to be key witnesses of Romans, which are representing our bondage. We've been in bondage, in Roman bondage for almost the last 2,000 years. We are still in bondage. We are about to be delivered from that bondage during the fulfillment of the fall, his fall appointed times. So, what do we got going on here? And what were they witness here? And it says, and behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, this is interesting. Remember, we were laboring this naos and herion, and what is the word being used here? And what is this term being used for curtain? And what is this term being used for torn? Because if we take the way this kind of thing is all traditionally taught, and I touched on this in the Avenger of Blood as a part of the atonement teaching in the Fall Appointed Times teachings last year, and said we were going to, look and take a journey further into all of this as a result of heading into this year's and his appointed times in spring. And so we're doing that. And so, as a part of that, this curtain, this kataetama, the Greek, the veil spread out, a curtain to cover. The root of this, kata, down from, throughout, according to, toward, along. Now, if we just think of this as curtain, and we know that they used to have the huge temple curtain, that would cover the first part of the sanctuary and things like this. And of course, this was present at the time of the Herodian reconstruction. But what is interesting here is that when it's referring to it in the Greek, it's actually to spread out, to cover. And it does present itself from a down from or throughout. So something is covering. Now, what the word is used here in Matthew is not herion. It's actually using neos, not something like the neos. It's actually saying neos, which means that whatever this is referring to is truly set apart. Now, we know by what Yeshua demonstrated, we know there's no record of the presence of Yah being anywhere near the reconstructed Herod's temple. So this is interesting. You would use the word herion here if it was actually referring to Herod's temple. If not, this would be a disconnect, a contradiction for which we could make a case against the very presence of a sanctified place. I could do this, especially if we were from an atheistic scholarly point of view. We could actually come in and go, well, Scripture's starting to contradict itself if you were to actually look deeper into the Greek. Or was it? The word there used is something that is covering the actual naos was torn. The word torn, the schizo, to cleave asunder. Look at this, rend, divide by rending, to split into factions. Now, this is interesting. If we just take the whole curtain, the temple thing, it tore, and how this is all really described and accepted on Christian side of the river, based on the Herodian temple, there's a little bit of a disconnect if we do a little bit of a deeper dive. So let's go on and look further here.
And just as well to point out, where you see the word torn here and the word split, it's the same Greek word. In the English, we have torn and split. Okay, now the Greek word for both of these is schizo. So essentially, the English is doing you a disservice because it's putting two words where there's actually one. So either the temple, whatever this veil is, was torn and the rocks were torn. Well, that doesn't really make sense. How can the rocks be torn? Or they were split, and whatever this veil was over the naos, that was split too. You can't have it both ways. You have to use one English word to reflect what the Greek is actually saying here.
Unless you're trying to paint a certain picture your way, and the English is actually causing a strip. So if we continue on here, Michael, we'll now look at the top, bottom, and split, which of course Michael's just explained the schizo, the schizo here. It's literally being used as a different word in English. So where it was saying temple in English, here they're now conveniently using two different words. And so is there a narrative that's trying to be spun, or unto myths that is trying, when I say trying to be spun, unintentionally, intentionally, whatever it is, the traditions, the myths take hold. And so we're reading into an account a certain way. Now, why are two different words being used here? Top to bottom is very interesting here in the English to the Greek. Okay, so the anathon, from above, from a higher place, of things which come from Elohim. Now, this is interesting. From the beginning, let there be light. Very few, so this is a very interesting thing here. Top. It's hard to capture this in English, but something is coming directly from Elohim in relationship to this account. And so the Greek is a little bit deeper on this. And then we go to the down, the kato, downwards, beneath. Not in front of, not in sight of, beneath, a place below, of temporal succession. So a temporary place. Think Jeremiah's grotto. There's something interesting there. So something from Elohim is coming down to something that is below, and there is a renting or a splitting of an actual covering of the naos occurring. Now, this whole account of a Herodian temple ripping, if we are to be honest with what the Greek is trying to capture here, and it's done not a bad job in the Greek, the mythos are not stacking up to this. With just a little bit of a deeper dive into this, why do we labor this? Again, we labored it a little bit in the Avenger of Blood teaching. This is Jeremiah's grotto, and in today's terms, and there's a bus station and stuff below it, and it's like you'd hardly recognize this, but there was this place below Golgotha, and we see in the gospel accounts where it refers to Golgotha in this place of the skull. It's very interesting. What is this? What were the disciples giving account for in the gospel accounts? What is interesting is this thing seems to be, I don't know, Michael, suspiciously sealed. Intentional, unintentional. We're not getting into conspiracy theory or anything else like this, but below what is believed to be or could be the place of Golgotha happens to be this sort of bus station. What is fascinating is why is this there in this incredible historic sort of area, whether you believe it to be there or not? Now, we know the Catholic position has led us to the Church of the Sepulchre, and there's other positions regarding what these gospel accounts were talking about. But we believe it could be as simple as something that was outside the area of the Garden Tomb and something that was given account for in the Brit. You see a picture there of a gentleman standing outside that when it was excavated, and that's a gentleman named Ron Wyatt. When I was in the actual land of Israel, and this was a visit in 2007, something interesting happened, because at the time for me, I tended to lean more to a Mount of Olives account as being the possible place of, where the death of the crucifixion of Messiah occurred. And and at that time I had not looked as deep as I should have, and certainly didn't, at least at that point, didn't consider the Christian tradition of the Church of the Sepulchre as being anywhere near, because there was a lot of monkey business there. But this, if we go to the next slide, there, Michael, there's something interesting that happened here, and I had an interesting account where a Floridian slip by the head of the Temple Mount Institute is a part of a private conversation, and we were there as a private briefing and given access to certain things at the time. I won't get into all of that, but it was an incredible time for me in the land at that time. And there was a Floridian slip there, which was, well, when the time is right, we will bring out the ark. It wasn't, we're waiting to know it or to find out, or where is it, the Ark of the Covenant, Indiana Jones stuff going on. None of this. What was interesting was it was very definite and precise. And so it jolted me into revisiting something, because at that time I was entertaining Mount of Olives stuff and looking at this, the Mount of Olives, and what really was going on here. They have it. They know it. They can bring this thing out. What's going on? And how would they know this? And so I revisited certain things that were going on by these interesting claims by a man named Ron Wyatt. Now, it's interesting because he's taken a lot of heat and flack for making this claim that he had discovered or indeed found the Ark of the Covenant in his diggings, and what he believed to be, and this was outside the northern gates, the Damascus gates in the old city, in the area of Golgotha, where you saw the bus station now below it and things like that. Now, what is interesting here is that I had kind of written this off, and I think he may have had an SDA background and all this kind of thing, and thought, these claims were extravagant on many fronts, and he's had his critics. But I remember seeing this claimed in, and he took a lot of heat and stood no financial gain and only but ridicule. And I wondered to myself at this time, is this interesting? Did this man tell the truth in his account? And so I revisited some things in relationship to this, because this was, in a wider sense, in the Temple Mount, in an area located in a very interesting place amongst the seven hills of Jerusalem, or the region which contains the Kidron Valley and the Mount of Olives, the temple itself, and indeed this area which was claimed to be of Golgotha, the place of the skull. And what he claimed was that Jeremiah's grotto was directly below where Messiah was crucified, and why this would have been outside the northern gate at this time and whatnot. So I went back to look at all of these things. And indeed, this interesting account in the book of Second Maccabees in relationship to what the prophet Jeremiah had done at the time, and with the Babylonian their flight from the Babylonian push, and all of this sorts of things. So what is going on here? There was other claims in relationship to what he discovered on the seat of this ark, this brown substance, and he made the claim that this was scraped off, and this was brought to Israeli scientists, and the Israeli scientists at the time had discovered 23 plus 1 chromosomes, and that after they had put it in the centrifuge and brought water into it, that this was actually still living, and they didn't know how this was possible. And so this is a part of his testimony and his claims. So I went and revisited. I was aware of this, but after I heard this statement, I'm going, how can they know where it is? And so confidently. So went and relooked at all of this, and I found it was interesting. And so we went and looked at this in light of Scripture. Did the light of Elohim literally shine on Messiah during his death on the ancient Tav? Now, the only way that we see this light in coming forth is if we're to look at the actual Greek and a little bit of a deep dive like we just did. You have to understand the difference between Neos and Herion. Now, what is interesting is the light of Elohim resides in the true set-apart place. So is there a disconnect here? Because of course, Ron White got close enough. He's not a Kohathite, Levite, and that sort of a thing. There's going to be some disconnects with Torah here. And very interesting, the current Jewish Sanhedrin, or them creating the Sanhedrin in the modern state of Israel right now, they're not bringing this thing out. Now, they may believe this is a way to honor Torah, or it may be if they do bring it out, it will actually expose that the presence of Elohim isn't there. And we're going to talk about this. Whatever be it agenda, or whether it be them just wanting to honor the Torah and they're waiting for a temple and to have a Levitical priesthood that meets the conditions of Torah, we're going to see. But it's suspiciously been partially covered up. And also we got some interesting statements coming from the head of the Temple Mount Institute itself. And so this led to looking at things a little bit deeper and revisiting these extravagant claims, these interesting claims by this gentleman, Ron Wyatt. So did the light of Elohim literally shine on Messiah during his death? Keep going there, Michael.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was muted there. What I was going to say is, for some of you where this may be like completely new understanding, I would recommend that you revisit Curtis's teachings that he did at the Fall Appointed Times just gone, so the 2024, because you go into a much greater detail as to the possibility of actually, when the rocks were rent, that Messiah's blood would have actually dripped down and landed on the ark. And you stopped there for the Fall Appointed Times. Now, we want to build upon that. So if you haven't got the foundation of that, go revisit the Fall Appointed Times, the Revenger of Blood teaching that Curtis did. But for the sake of today, we want to build upon the foundation that Curtis laid during that time.
Actually, just go back to that again, Michael. Just go back to the image again. There's just something I want to mention.
Yeah.
Just jog my... Remember, we were talking about what's capturing the Greeks, the rock rented from above to below. Now, what's interesting is if of course you're seeing this, it's speaking about it as something that is above to below. But if you could have a cross section and see through the earth, you would actually see a renting. But it was the rock that was renting. Of course, the claim of Ron Wyatt was that this would have allowed, with the mixture of water and blood, it would have had the viscosity to reach what would have been Jeremiah's grotto, where the presence of Elohim would still have been at that time. So the blood is dripping onto it. And this extraordinary claim. Now, what is interesting is that the Greek, when I revisited the deep dive on this, seemed, and although Ron Wyatt wasn't trying to make this claim and he didn't understand the difference between Arion and Naos and certainly didn't reflect that in his testimony, when I, test all things, when I did this with the Brit, it was interesting how it didn't, at least at the very least, discredit him. And in fact, not only did it not discredit his claim, it actually seemed to support it much more than the Mythos account. So this was a surprise to me as well at the time, because I'm sitting there going, this is an extraordinary claim or thought, Mr. Wyatt. Yet, and testimony, and yet the Greek account, if you get past the English, actually didn't come against his testimony, and he wasn't even trying to bring that forth as a part of the support for it at the time. And so that was a part of something I was revisiting, in a sense, to challenge this claim based on my conversation with the head of the Temple Mount Institute at the time. All right, sorry, Will.
Now, some of you may be very astute Bible students and go, well, if Ron Wyatt did truly discover the true Ark of Elohim, why didn't it kill him? Right? Because we have records, and we're going to go through this now. And this is where things get very, 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 very interesting, because does Elohim's presence stay in one place at all times throughout the history of what we would call the Bible? No, we see that Yah's presence moved. And from time to time, it completely changed place. And so this is key to understand, because we do believe that at the time of Yeshua's crucifixion, this was the Naos of Elohim. But come to almost 2,000 years later, Ron Wyatt's able to get near something. What's going on? Bear that in the back of your mind. So what did actually happen at the ancient Tav? How does light factor into this? And what did the Roman centurions at the time really see? Before we get there, yet again, we have to lay a little bit of Torah groundwork. We've put here, handle with care. Numbers 3 and chapter 4, it's the Torah commandments of how the tabernacle and its furnishings were to be handled. And Yah was extremely precise. In Numbers 3:29 onwards, it says, the clans of the sons of Kohath were to camp on the south side of the tabernacle, with Elizaphan, the son of Uzziel, as chief of the father's house of the clans of the Kohathites. And their guard duty involved the ark, the table, the lampstand, so the menorah, the altars, so that's both the altar of sacrifice and the golden altar of incense, the vessels of the sanctuary with which the priests minister, and the screen, all the service connected with these. So the tribe of Levi was one tribe, and it was divided up into various clans. You had Aaron's clan, which was the priests, and you had these other clans, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, I forget the other one, but each clan had a particular job description of what they were to handle. Now, within the Levites, the clan of the Kohathites were charged with carrying the ark and the vessels mentioned here when the camp was to be moved from place to place. The other clans of the Levites, they dealt with, like, the tent pegs and the structural components of the tabernacle. And so the Torah is telling you who gets to move the ark when the ark is to be moved. And Numbers 4, go do this in your own time. It actually goes into great detail as to how the objects within the tabernacle were to be handled and which clans had their roles in transporting the tabernacle and its objects. But for the sake of time, read it in your own time. But the way this was to be done was when the camp was to be moved, the priests, the sons of Aaron, would go in and cover all the objects with leather and then with a blue covering. And once all the objects inside were covered, then the Kohathites were brought in, and the priests would say to the Kohathites, you carry this, you carry that. The Kohathites were not allowed to look upon the ark or any of the set-apart objects, or they would die. But they weren't even allowed to touch them. So how did they move it? We know that the ark and the tables of showbread and the altars, poles were to be put into them so that they could be carried. So the Torah is very specific. The Kohathites, they're to carry it, but they're not allowed to look on it or even touch it, which is why the poles were put through the ark so that they could be carried. This is very, very specific, and Judah is extremely aware of these commandments. Fast forward to the time of King David. You have this really interesting account where David and the priests are moving the ark from one place to another, and we have this very interesting account that is given to us. I'll let you read this, Curtis.
And when they came to the threshing floor of Nachan, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of Elohim and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Interesting. Oxen don't very often stumble. If you look at the picture of the Aleph and the Tav in this relationship, it's almost as if this was done intentionally by Elohim. Maybe because they're transporting something in a way that they shouldn't, Michael. The anger of Yah was kindled against Uzzah, and Elohim struck him down there because of his error. And his error may have been involved with not only the touching of it, but the transporting of it. And he died there beside the ark of Elohim. So this is pretty serious reality going on here. The presence of Yah is there. And somebody just paid a big price and Uzra this strength, and we got here. He was the Merarite Levite, not a Kohathite, and so he's not one that is able to handle that ark as instructed by Torah with using the poles, as Michael was saying. What's interesting, though, is to be that close or present to the way this was being transported at the time. He would have had to have been a Levite, and so, but of a different clan, and not of the clan as according to the instructions concerning the Kohathites. And so this is interesting. How is this ark being transported, Michael? Is this honoring Torah? Is there something going on here? Were they handling this correctly?
Well, in Numbers 3 and especially Numbers 4, it goes into great detail. And Numbers 4 says that the clan of the Kohathites were to carry the ark on the poles. This means they carried it by hand, not on an ox, on a wagon. You even see this in the story of Joshua crossing the River Jordan. And it says that the ark was being carried by the Levites, and they stopped the River Jordan parts, and they had to stand in the bed of the River Jordan so that the whole house of Israel could move through. So we see from the Torah and the writings throughout the Old Testament that the ark was supposed to be carried by the Kohathites by hand. And so here, what on earth is this ark doing in a wagon being pulled by oxen? Do you see what's going on here? And what is Uzzah, though he's a Merarite, he shouldn't be this close to the ark. He should definitely not be within grabbing distance. And what's really interesting, the name Uzzah, it means strength. Now look at how he's doing things. His hand, which is a symbol of your strength. Are we being told as a kind of shadow picture, this is what happens when you do things by your own hand, by your own strength? And
think in that sense, what we were saying earlier in the teaching about Yah's command in his presence, not man's decree, man's strength, man dealing with something incorrectly. And so Yah actually has an anger being kindled here as a result of what's going on by Usa. This is very interesting when you consider the actual name of the one who's about to pay his life for doing this incorrectly and doing it in a way that may not been in the sense of Yah's command being done his way for his purposes.
And so, if that's the biblical principle, how on earth did Ron Wyatt get so close to the ark if what he says is true? Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We have this really well-known account when Moshe came down from Mount Sinai. So this is where he's bringing down the tablets of the covenant. With the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with Elohim. We know that Moshe spoke to Elohim face to face. And so by being in the presence of set apartness itself, his face shone. By being in the light of Elohim, Moshe was essentially shining the light of Elohim. And so, again, this is going to play a part of what are we to be doing? Are we shining the light of Messiah? Or are we, do we even have the light of Messiah with us? Back to the story of the death of Messiah. We have, and actually, this is at his death. There's this really interesting thing that Curtis and I have spoken about before. In Matthew 27, it says, the tombs were also opened, and many of the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs, look at this, after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So the book of Matthew is capturing this thing that at the resurrection of Messiah, other people were raised as well. And this was witnessed by many people in the city of Jerusalem. And then the account goes back to the crucifixion of Messiah. It says, when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Yeshua, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. Now, we don't stop and think enough about what is truly going on here, because you're talking about a pagan of pagans doing a hard swing the other way. He's gone from worshiping the Roman pantheon, arguably, to this man was the son of Elohim. This is one of the widest swings you could ever take in any sense of the matter. And so something that they're witnessing is causing this hard swing in this former pagan to go in, this is the son of the living Elohim. And so the reason I raise this is, here's the thing. What will be taught generally out there is that the Roman centurion would have seen the rending of the temple curtain. Here's the thing. You're a Roman centurion. You've been charged with the bondage of the Jewish nation. If you were to witness the Jewish temple being torn in two, you would be thinking, serves them right. Think about what's going on. Whatever actually went down at the ancient Tav, you've got to remember, the Roman centurions were hardened by war. They were used to seeing blood, torture. Like, these were, their consciences had been seared at the best. And this Roman centurion is going, this was the son of Elohim. To such a hardened war veteran, a temple curtain splitting in two would have not done the job. In fact, you would have used that to bolster your faith in your pagan gods and saying, this is why we ought to rule over you Jews.
And that's if you take the assumption that they could actually see and clearly see a temple curtain at all. And this becomes some of the challenges in relationship to the Mount of Olives, amongst many others involving the Kidron Valley and all these sorts of things. See, we're told that's what they witnessed, but who said that? What we do know is Scripture said what they saw was the rocks rent and something took place. And as a result of these two things, this Roman centurion is filled with awe. So he's filled with awe. So as Michael said, this turnaround to such a degree instantly from paganism to knowing this is truly the Son of Elohim is a huge event, not wondering where in the vast distance, a curtain tore or something in these crazy Jewish people and their worshiping of their gods. They wouldn't even be able to relate to that, understand it, even know the detail around it. Whatever took place was absolutely them in awe. The ground renting and splitting and witnessing something at the time of Yeshua on the ancient Tav bleeding out. And it instantly did this.
And so we've put this thing, what did the centurion see? Because what Curtis mentioned earlier and in the Revenger of Blood series is when the rocks tore and were split, and this would have allowed the blood of Messiah with the combination of water, because blood and water came out of his side. Did this go down and touch the ark? Here's what Curtis didn't say back then. What if light came forth from the rocks? Because we're talking of the Naos here, the true Naos, the Ark of the Covenant. What if light, as we put in the earlier, right at the start of this segment, did the light of Elohim literally shine on Messiah during his death on the Tav? Now, think about this, because you have a Roman centurion witnessing an earthquake at the death of Messiah, the rocks renting, blood and water coming out of Yeshua. That is interesting in of itself. And then the rock splitting and light coming forth from the rocks and shining on Messiah. Now, would that swing a hardened pagan to go in, this was the Son of Elohim?
And things can be conspicuous by their absence. They're seeing the rocks rent and what took place. Something here. It is the glory of Elohim to conceal a matter and the honor of kings to search it out. One thing's for sure. He clearly saw it. Something took place as a result of this renting. And we clearly know that it brought him to absolute understanding this was the Son of Elohim. Instantly. What was he actually privy to? And what did he actually witness? And if that present hadn't left the ark yet, and those rocks had rented, and the very blood that purchased that covenant was in it, was now actually happening. Is it interesting that something broke forth from the ground? Literally, let there be light, and something was now being transported because holy, set-apart blood was the only thing that would be the actual vessel for the countenance and the light of Elohim to shine upon his Son.
Puts an interesting spin on let the light of Yah shine upon you, and what we would know as the Aaronic blessing. We'll get to that in a second. But so far, I mean, in the lead up to this passage, we see scripturally that where the presence of Yah is, there is light. We saw it with Moshe. We saw it with the tabernacle. We saw it with Solomon's temple. And if Jeremiah's grotto was the place where Yah's presence was at the time, what actually came forth from the rocks?
Now we're starting to hint at that if Ron Wyatt's claim was to be true, why possibly he didn't die? Because the actual president. It's quite possible that by time Ron Wyatt, if his claims to be true, occurred, whether he knew it or not, the reason why he didn't die was because something had actually happened almost 2,000 years before he found it. And it kept him alive. He was able to discover it.
Let me ask the community this. What is the Naos now? Is it Jeremiah's grotto? When did Jeremiah's grotto stop being the Naos and move on to his people? And what is it that makes his people the Naos?
In fact, we go as far as to say there had to be some event that we could link to that allowed this process, this thread, this light going through. What was that event? Well, could it be as serious as the actual centroid of the great plan of redemption and the fulfillment of his appointed times, that the transfer was going to actually happen? Because it's no longer recorded in Jeremiah's grotto. We know that Solomon's temple was destroyed. It's no longer there. We know the tabernacle. We know it was never in Herod's temple. What's going on here? Because Yeshua is now boldly going to proclaim something. Don't you know you are the Naos? Something's going on here, and his prayers before that were something of a chad. So his father and son are becoming this picture, beautiful picture of a chad and light and countenance, breaking forth the rocks, occurring on the ancient Tav while he's dying, is stunning and it's staggering, but it is the only single event we can attribute in all of Scripture to make it possible for the way Yeshua would now describe himself and echad with us and indeed ourselves. It's fascinating. We don't know where else we can go with this. Perhaps it's just literally been saying it all along, Michael. We know the truth. There's a lot going on.
Let's keep following the thread. It gets so exciting. Behold, this is his resurrection. There was a great earthquake. Oh, there was one of those at his death, wasn't there, Curtis? For an angel of Yah descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. Like, again, think, these are Roman soldiers. These are war-hardened people. They've seen it all. And they're trembling. And what's present? Light coming down from Elohim.
Isn't this interesting how the presence of Elohim equals a set-apart place, and it is linked to this countenance? Do you remember Moshe steps into the light of the burning bush? Take off your sandals, Moshe, for you are on set-apart ground. You mean his presence makes anywhere he is set apart. According to the Torah. And are these accounts in the Brit actually disregarding that, or are they actually confirming it? One thing's for sure. The countenance of Elohim, the light, let there be light, is coming forth, but now it appears to be directly associated with Messiah, Michael.
Yeah, because again, if you've been entertaining myths, you'll have a particular understanding of what we're about to read. This is Yeshua appearing to Mary Magdalene after his resurrection, and he says, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my Elohim and your Elohim." Now, what's commonly taught out there is that Yeshua is saying this to Mary because he's resurrected, and if Mary was to touch him, she would Levitically defile him before he's ascended to present himself in the heavenly temple. I've heard the claims. Here's the thing.
Mythos strikes again.
What if Yeshua is saying, don't cling to me, because if you touch me, you'll die? He is the light of the world. He is set apart. He's resurrected now. He's not in fallen flesh anymore. He's the resurrected king. What if Yeshua is saying he's actually saving her life? Because let's remember, did the light from the naos shine upon Yeshua while he was on the Tav? And now he's been resurrected in light. Light was everywhere around the garden tomb. And we know what happens when you get too near the ark of Elohim. You get struck down. What if Yeshua is saying, do not cling to me, because if not, down you go?
This particular passage, again, the way it's taught is just with certain assumptions, and it's not with, one thing that has been interesting in my journey over the years, just when I think I'm literal about something, I rediscovered I'm not literal enough. Of course, these sort of discussions, and when Michael and I were going through these teachings, appointed times teachings, or any teachings we go through, one of the interesting things is, what's staggering is you discover, was I literal enough? Like, is it actually saying, means what it says and says what it means? One thing for sure, with all of this going on, he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In other words, the rules of Torah would be applying here. You see, this is what's interesting. If he hasn't changed, we can see no other explanation for this other than that he was saving the life of his beloved. You are actually not qualified to touch me in this place right now, for whatever reason. He's literally, we believe those reasons could be associated with Torah instructions and commands.
Now, here's what's really exciting about this, because some of you may go, well, what about Thomas? He says, touch me. Look at the statement he says to Mary, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. One of the fulfillments of the spring feasts is first fruits. Okay, now what did we read here? That when Yeshua was resurrected, many of the bodies of the saints were raised and they appeared to many. You'll have heard Curtis go on about this, that was Yeshua literally fulfilling this? He's the high priest waving his sheaf of the first fruits during the week of unleavened bread. And is this arguably where the 24 elders came from? But here's the thing. At this instance, it would seem that Yeshua had not presented his sheaf. By the time Yeshua gets to his disciples, and we know there's a few events that have occurred between that time, some things occurred where now you can touch Yeshua. And I believe it's to do with this. He must have ascended and presented his sheaf. And people will say, well, Michael, he didn't ascend until, the book of Acts and so forth. Yeshua had the ability to come here, there, and everywhere, just like that.
He's glorified and filled with the countenance and the direct shining of the light of Elohim. We're in a different place now. Something happened during the literal fulfillment of the Passover almost 2,000 years ago. And it's hard to come to any other conclusions, whether you want to believe that Ron Wyatt was giving a truthful and testimony and account. For whatever reason, he just did this crazy account and didn't talk about anything Michael and I have just talked about. Just made this statement that happens to line up with a little bit of a deeper dive. But whether you believe it or not, it's hard to start getting to another conclusion as to what actually transpired at the ancient Tav. So this really isn't about Ron Wyatt or his claims or not in that sense. This is about what actually went down in relationship and what is this light of Elohim, no matter what you want to believe. It doesn't change any of that. And it's important that we keep that perspective as we move forward, because there's some other interesting things that are going on here. Michael, soldiers are being paid off. Something is so big, so bold, something that changed the Centurion Guard to claim this is indeed the son of Elohim. Well, now we've got this other account, again, involving our Roman bondage. There's a lot of Romans entering the picture here that really are going to believe because they start seeing the light. Is there a little bit of a flavor coming on as to where we're heading with some of these series? Because there's all these Romans showing up that are seeing something, and it's related to light. And while they were going, and behold, some of the guard went out to the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers. Why? What's going on? They're paying the soldiers off. The soldiers are coming. They're saying something to the Sanhedrin. Some event has taken place, which is clearly identifying that Messiah is indeed the son of Elohim and resurrected. And he said, tell the people his disciples came by night and stole him away while they were asleep. So they're saying, look, just say anything. Here's some money, but don't give this account. There's a covering of something. There's something that's being covered here, and we believe it is the light of Elohim that is trying to be covered with the mythos, with the actual Sanhedrin at the time, with the account. Something is covering the light. This is interesting. And if it comes to the governor's ear, and we'll satisfy him and keep him out of your trouble. So don't worry, we'll take care of your bondage in relationship to your government restrictions and rules. So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. Very interesting how they were told to not speak of it, got paid the sums of money, and even took care of their government obligations at this time. Anything to make sure that there was a covering of light, and something these soldiers had seen actually changed their whole perspective on everything, to the point where the religious system at the time had to go into gear and into action to make sure that this stayed under wraps.
And here's what's interesting. Who covered the light? Was it the Romans, or was it the religious system? The Romans were just a pawn, but it was the religious system paid them off. It was their doing. So it would seem Yah wants the Romans to see this light. He's gone to great lengths to make sure Romans see light. And now we've got religion, mystery Babylon, going to great lengths to conceal that light. Should bring some interesting scriptures to mind about, not hiding light under a bushel and, let's start wrapping up this first part. We've put here, what did the adversary cover? We've got this really interesting account in Ezekiel with the king of Tyre, but it's been also used in this language of, it would seem to point to the adversary himself. It says, you were the anointed guardian cherub. I placed you, you were on the holy mountain of Elohim, in the midst of the stones of fire you walked. Now, Hebraically, fire and light are one and the same thing, because they didn't have electricity back then. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of Elohim, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Now, when you dig into this, first of all, the word cherub in the Hebrew, keruv, think the cherubim, think the living creatures, right? We know that from the accounts in Scripture, there's 4 living creatures. Here it's saying it would seem there was a 5th one. until he was cast down from the mountain of Elohim. Not many people think of the adversary actually being a cherubim. Like, this is serious. Now, the English says guardian cherub. The Hebrew sachach here, it actually means to hedge, to fence, to shut in. Look at this, to block, to overshadow, to screen, to stop the approach, to shut off, to cover. If Hasatan, the adversary, was literally around the throne as a cherubim, as one of the original 5 living creatures before he was cast down, what is it telling you about him? What was he screening? What was he preventing the approach to? What was he covering? Because again, we see Yah going to great length to shine his light. And here, the adversary would seem to be covering it. What were the religious authorities doing in paying off the Romans? Concealing the light. It puts a whole new dimension to Yeshua saying to the religious, you are of your father the devil. You're covering something. You're preventing, you're blocking. You know, Yeshua would say, woe to you Pharisees, for you prevent people from entering into life. Again, what was Yeshua saying to them? And so this is going to start to form part of our challenge, maybe. Are we shining light or are we covering it? So what will happen at the return of Messiah, at the fulfillment of the fall appointed times? Curtis.
Yeah, we got the 7 hills of the region of Jerusalem. Interesting. This was one of the candidates for the sitting place of the whore of Babylon. Babylon and Mecca come into play of this, these 7 hills that she sits upon. Anyway, the greater area around the temple and where it is, the famous 7 hills of the region of Jerusalem, and what I had briefly touched on and was hinting towards in this region is also the Mount of Olives. So this is interesting. So let's keep going here because there's something going on that's given to us. Contained an interesting prophecy by the great prophet Zechariah. And then Yah will go out and fight against those nations is when he fights in the day of battle. So there's something interesting here, this prophetic prophecy in relationship to the fulfillment of his great plan of redemption, particularly in relationship to the fulfillment, I believe, of the appointed times, this allusion to what's going on, and the finishing of the great plan of redemption up until this last and great final age, his return for his last 1,000 year, this last great day in order to achieve the fulfillment of what we see in his appointed times in the instructions of Torah. Look at it says in this, on that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies between Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be the Mount of Olives shall be split too. This is interesting. From the east to the west, be a very wide valley, so that one half of the mountain shall move northward and the other half will move southward. So as a result of this, it's going to just go and then go west. Now, this is fascinating here that this is recorded. Why? Why would this be recorded? So if we keep going on here, Zechariah is making this note of the second coming of Messiah. In 2 Samuel 15, 23, 24, it says this, and all of the land wept aloud. There's an interesting allusion here to something called the Brook of Kidron, or we think of the Kidron Valley, which is what sits between one of the peaks of the 7 hills of Jerusalem. So the Mount of Olives, or the height of the Olives, is only one peak. It is all within the same region, and you've got the Kidron Valley, and you've got the temple right beside it that was built. Now, this is interesting here in this account, because this is King David's flight from his son Absalom, who I think in here would be a shadow picture of the adversary coming after his father. Now, what's interesting is there's mention of this, the Kidron. And all the land is wept aloud, and as all the people passed by, and the king crossed the brook Kidron. Now, Kidron here is interesting. It means dark. To mourn, to dark, to be dark, to darken, to cause to mourn. So this Kidron Brook is interesting. This valley is being associated with something, a mourning that's going on. And all the people passed on toward the wilderness. And Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok, so we got the Zadok priesthood, interestingly included in this, came also with all the Levites bearing the Ark of the Covenant. So the Kohathites are there, and they set down the Ark of Elohim until the people had all passed out of the city. So the Ark is now directly involved with this passing of something in this account. And you've got this incredible shadow picture going on of the adversary and this chasing. This Kidron is come into play here. Why? What is actually happening here? They're crossing this place of darkness, or the dark, or mourning. We see here, what's captured in John 18:1-2, we see again the Kidron is actually mentioned. When Yeshua had spoken these words, and he went out with his disciples across the brook, the Kidron. Again, it's interesting. Yeshua is crossing with the disciples at apparently a similar, or maybe even the exact same place. And now they're going towards the garden, the other way, which he'd entered and his disciples entered. Now, what's about to happen during this crossing of the morning, the darkness? Now we see, so we got Absalom's sons chasing in the King David account, who is the shadow picture of Messiah. Now we've got actual Messiah here, and guess what? Somebody's about to betray him. Well, this account is being given. Now there's a direct link, because this betrayal is going to lead him to the ancient Tav. This is interesting, this connection. That's all in our Tanakh account. That's also in our Brit Shadachah account, and it's both associated with an adversarial position that's going on. And this betrayal is going to take him right to the ancient Tav. And he knew the place where Yeshua had often met there with his disciples. Now, Kidron here, or the Kedron in the Greek, is turbid. He's kind of relating to this turbid, this flowing of water, and it goes down into the Dead Sea. Again, associated with this adversarial role, now it's a betraying role that is going on here. So let's keep going. So he's being betrayed by the dark. Now, what is fascinating here, if we look at the map of what we're looking at here, Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount at the time of Yeshua in Zechariah 14:15, and how we're to look at, this all sort of coming together with this claim of Jeremiah's grotto at Golgotha and the simple gospel accounts of the place of the skull, or Golgotha. This is interesting. Does Zechariah connect to something very interesting at the return of Messiah that is directly connected to his death on the ancient Tav? And if you had Elohim's perspective on this, it gets quite interesting from the earth itself. I've got the earthquake Tav here. We know the rocks rented, something went down. We believe the blood went down, and going onto the Ark of the Covenant, releasing the light of Elohim. But what would be Elohim's perspective of this on the return as mentioned in Zechariah? Because this is interesting, and it's quite possible this description, whatever is built or whatever exists on the Temple Mount at the time of this event, is going to be destroyed. So we can build as many temples as you want, as big as you want, whatever it is, something is going to happen that is going to bring whatever man has built down. And that would include the Dome of the Rock and everything else. But the Kidron Valley sits between these two, and we know that we have an earthquake moving from the east to the west. Is it possible that Elohim himself, Yeshua descending on the Mount of Olives, is going to uncover the ark itself? And this earthquake, should it occur, is actually describing, interestingly enough, does a direct line from the Mount of Olives in this description right through to where the possible claim of Jeremiah's grotto is. What is interesting, if you take the Kidron Valley with this, and this place of moving in the dark, this would form the base or the stake of the ancient Tav from an earth perspective. Michael, does he put an ancient Tav from his perspective anywhere else? Did he do that in the wilderness after the Passover, after the Exodus, with the actual tribes of Israel? Do you mean he might be doing it again? Is it possible that we're actually seeing something here that is going to be made in the earth? No, I got a little side note, interesting side note here. I just got to share with you as we finish this up. The water mixed with blood in the temple Passover during the actual Passover itself. Okay, as this is occurring, because they're getting ready to prepare the lambs to put them in for the Pesach meal. Yeshua is dying on the ancient Tav at this same time. Now, at the end of the Passover offerings, the lambs of the blood in the temple, at the usual evening offering, the evening offering is generally between what we call 2:30 to 3 p.m., leading up to the going down of the sun, which would mark true evening, which would be the commencement of the first day of unleavened bread. So they're in a rush to get this done. This is why they were in a rush to get them on the ancient Tav, because they've got all these lambs that are about to be slaughtered. The temple would need cleansing. In other words, it was a bloody mess. There was blood everywhere. The priest would remove the plugs from the drain holes in the temple at this time. Now, we know from accounts in the Talmud and the Mishnah and whatnot, they call this the Shishin, or represents the pits at the base of the sacrificial altars in the temple at this time. Thousands of gallons of lamb's blood would begin to descend into the pits. Think Sheol. Now, as we're saying all this sort of thing. But this blood is coming down. Now, what would then happen is the water in these channels that were leading up to it, the courtyards, would be opened, and cleansing fresh water would come in and would also descend into the pits and be mixed with the blood. This mixing of this blood would go out of the pipes from the pits, and guess where it'd empty? It'd empty into the Kidron Brook, becoming a literal river of blood running down the base of the Tavan, the base, the stake of this earth being seen from Elohim's perspective. Let's put this in perspective. If you were to look at the base of the actual Tav, while this is going on, and they're washing the lamb's blood, the sacrifice of that, and the actual lamb is on the ancient Tav. The lambs that were being sacrificed are there, and what's coming out? Let's just read the next scripture of where this really goes. This is what happened with the soldiers. Again, Rome's involved here. But when they came to Yeshua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. We'll get to that in the Pesach meal coming up and whatnot. It was very clear that in this instance, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once came out the blood and the water. So while this event is happening on the temple, coming out of the side of the Temple Mount into the Kidron Brook, at the same time, water and blood, the viscosity, is coming out of Messiah, the actual temple. If you believe this to be a coincidence during the literal fulfillment, I got news for you. You are seeing something that is stunning. In my perspective, you have Elohim's true perspective of literally looking at the stake, the base of the Kidron Valley becoming a torrent of river and blood coming out of the side of the temple, while it's literally being fulfilled coming out of the literal temple now and literally coming out of the side of Messiah. If any of you don't think this is interesting, fair enough. Michael and I do. There's something going on that only an Elohim can write here. And he can do it outside the time domain, and he can look at his perspectives. And can he know what was going to become the fulfillment of the ancient Tav, how it was going to be done? And was he looking at the Kidron Valley, or this place of mourning that is always being the base of that earthen Tav that's actually there? It's so much, it starts to do, does our head in, as to what's actually going on here. I don't even know if we can get close to the justice of what Elohim might be revealing here as we come to the end of the age and what he's making known to us at this time. But it's literally keeping us up to all hours of the night. We cannot get our heads around this. It just keeps going more and more and more. The excitement, the understanding, the humbling is stunning. it gets beyond. No human could write this. No one could make this up as a faith. No one could literally do this. And Hasatan's been trying to cover the whole thing because it's the light of Elohim being exposed. Let's keep going, Michael, as we bring this to an end. Does he want us now to bring his light to the world? Let's think very seriously about this, because he's about to make some statements as we go in to the next teaching in the Feast of the Week's teachings and what this is about, because you're seeing Romans everywhere here. And then you're also going to see an account coming in Scripture, the book of Ruth. And so we got some interesting conversations next week. But let's just leave you with this. Yeshua's send-off, Michael.
So John chapter 17, this is Yeshua's final prayer before he's about to pay the price for the plan of redemption. And he's saying this: as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Now, this is the light of the world speaking. All right. So the light of the world was sent into the world, and then he's sending his disciples out into the world. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. That includes us. We're here because of this scripture being fulfilled. Now, what's the purpose? That they may be all one. Just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Now, the Hebrew Gospel of John actually uses the word echad there. So there's Yeshua's prayer is that those who believe in him through this word will become one with the light of the world. So there's this oneness. And let's remember that echad has this huge, bridal perspective to it. This is the light of the world saying, I want you to be one with me. He goes on to say, the glory that you have given me, I have given them. The Hebrew Gospel of John uses the word kavod there. And we went in the Treasured Possession series, we spoke about this glory that isn't supposed to be shared, but how that can only work from a bridal perspective. This glory, this light. So Yeshua is the light of the world. He has the glory, and he's bestowing it upon those that become one with him. Is it so that they can then cover it? No, that they may be one even as we are one, I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly echad, so that, look at this, the world may know that you have sent me and loved them, even as you loved me. He wants the world to see that light. This is what Yeshua is saying. And the word is going to go forth. The light will be shone, and he wants the world to see it. How? Through his disciples, through the word going out, and us believing in that world, in that word. But the enemy in Mystery Babylon has gone to great lengths to shroud and cover that light. But this is Yeshua's send-off. Become one with me, with the light of the world, so that the world may know who the light is and where that light shines from. This is Yeshua. It's his final moments with his disciples. He says, behold, I'm sending out the promise of my Father upon you. But stay in the city, look at this, until you are clothed with power from on high. Think power, glory, light. Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And while he blessed them, he parted from them and was carried up into heaven. Now, here's the question. What did Yeshua say when he blessed them?
I think he's a high priest. I think he's the high priest, Michael, isn't he? He's the king, the high priest, the Messiah.
And he's saying something's going to clothe you with power. This puts a whole new light, pardon the pun, on this well-known blessing. Yah bless you and guard you. Yah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yah lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. And if you look at the Hebrew of this, it's actually in the imperfect tense, which means it's future. Yah will make his face shine upon you. He will lift up his countenance upon you. And so if that is what Yeshua is saying to his disciples, he's saying, hang around in Jerusalem. Why? Because Yah will make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. He will lift up his countenance upon you. That's how you know you are going to be clothed with power from on high. You have the high priest blessing his disciples, shining his light upon them so that they can then go and shine that light to the world. Because it turns out Yah wants the world to see that light.
And Michael, at this time, it's quite possible this blessing was first person, literally being fulfilled to his disciples.
Yeah.
Literally saying, I bless you. I guard you. Not a covering cherub. I'm making my face shine upon you. He's literally speaking first person. The literal fulfillment of the promise. I will lift my countenance upon you. I grant you shalom. Go forth. This is the high priest now doing the blessing.
And in fact, is there scriptural precedent for what you've just said, Curtis? You betcha. We wouldn't have put it in the teaching otherwise, guys. This is the message. This is the book of 1 John. This is the message we have heard from him. From who? Well, who did John hear the message from? From Yeshua. And proclaimed to you. So he's passing the light on that Elohim is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. Now, who is the light? Who is the truth? Who is the way? But if we walk in the light, remember Yeshua's prayer that we may become one with the light of the world. As he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Yeshua, his son, cleanses us from all sin. All sin.
You mean he's associating the blood and the water directly to light and it getting to us somehow? What have we been reading in the New Testament, Michael? Do we really know what we're actually reading? Even the English seems to be capturing this. Honestly, going over this teaching, and Michael and I were going through this, we were wondering if we ever read the Brit. When you start to just go, what are we actually reading?
Here's what's interesting. John said that Elohim is light. Here's what our king had to say. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. It's very interesting if Elohim is light.
How does that read now, given the account? I am the light of the world. It's in every context imaginable, including perhaps the actual literal one. And no matter what you may believe in relationship to the testimony of Ron Wyatt, what we're trying to look at is the actual event that happened in the ancient Tav, whatever you want to hang on to with whatever you've taught, learned in your traditions, everything else. It will ultimately not change that somehow the light of the world is to go forth through something. And it is important. And no matter what you believe, what you think, whatever is going on, it will not change this fact. Michael and I just found it quite incredible that there happens to be some very literal things that point to the literal countenance and light of Elohim right back at the beginning of all of this. Let there be light. And it does not stop at the end of unleavened week. There is something coming, a week of jubilees, if you will, something that is an appointed time that he is very much a part of, that is alive and living to this day, and it's coming towards Shavuot. And so we're going to be talking about some interesting things coming up, eh, Michael?
Yeah. This is just the warm up because, as we said, we're going to leave a challenge with the community. And maybe some of you are starting to go, does it have to do with shining his light? Yes. But how does that work? How are we to go about it? What does it even mean to shine the light of Messiah in a dark world?
And should attempt to do it in our own strength, because there seems to be scriptures that say no, we shouldn't be attempting to do it in our own. So what does this look like, and how is it living and in play right now?
It certainly sheds new light, on the spring feasts. Hey, let's stop there, and we'll have some Q&A. Amen.